Hi. You're obviously attracting a lot of attention these days with your NASA channel.
Yeah, NASA took out NASA television on the internet. Mm-hmm. So.
And we'd like to know a bit more about you. What's your background? What made you a sudden specialist with the shape of the Earth?
Well, if I tell you it's a certain thing, and without having an instrument to prove it for over 1,000 years, let's say 500, I'll be generous, and there's no instrument or exploration of the surface, but you tell everybody it's that, if you're wrong, are you going to tell everybody?
Good question.
There's a lot riding here. Everybody who's got a degree in physics, the credibility of every university institution over the past 500 years, the concept of Darwinism, evolution, where we're from. If they lie about the shape, everything falls apart. Even the notion of scarcity, especially if there's more real estate, with more land, more resources, more oil.
And what about you? Where do you come from?
Your imagination.
Meaning, what's your background, your studies, what?
Self-taught, high realist painter. Started painting at the age of 3. So before my brain was gotten a hold of by curriculums and schools, I was already well on my way in understanding perspective on the horizon line. Like how to draw perspective, 3-dimensional reality form. My goal at a very young age was to be able to reproduce paintings that looked like reality, like a camera took it. It's just this weird fetish I've always had since I was very young. When you would look at an image, I would have a photo right next to the image, and I'd really get off on confusing people whether they could just and I'd say, which one's the photo? And I would get off. It's been this freaky fetish I've always had to watch people's eyes sort of scramble. And it would come up closer, and I'd be, no, 6 feet. You have to decide from 6 feet. In this case, when it comes to a picture of the Earth from space, not only will no one ever go up in a rocket to check out if it does look like that, but it's more than the distance of 6 feet.
So you were hired by NASA not because of your knowledge in astronomy, just because of your talent at painting?
They enjoyed the way I painted things made things look real, like my understanding of light. How I could take something that doesn't exist in reality. After a certain point, I surpassed needing photos, and I could basically construct things that don't exist, understanding how light would hit form. And they recruited me after a vernissage, after I graduated from political science intelligence at a Jesuit school in Canada, known as St. Francis Xavier. They recruited me at a university exhibition.
And what was your job like?
Well, in the beginning it was like, we'd like to see some samples of textures and stuff like that, and they started really pushing me into using, different types of spill effects and stuff like that. They already had an idea, like they seemed to already have this system of textures or ways to make textures. So they asked me to, I guess I was just filling in on somebody else's work, like a predecessor who went into retirement. And once in a while I would get calls from a gentleman who was the head of the graphics department, and he'd ask me to change the color on things or the lighting. And then what they would do is they would send me like a drawing or an architectural drawing of like an instrument that might be scouting the surface of a celestial body, be it a moon or a planet. And then they would ask me to transpose these objects on the textures, and they would give me certain directions of like the light is at this angle, this time of the day, at this intensity, and then I would have to make the shadows congruous to the information they would make, and I'd have to make it look real.
And can you explain to us what happened between your steady job that you just described and...
It wasn't steady. It was on and off, and it was freelance.
Okay. And what happened between that period and now? What is the turning point that made you totally dissociate yourself from what you were working for?
Was about a year after I met some of the people I was working with over the phone and on computer at a function, and I think it was kind of like somewhat of an initiation to this division of NASA. And there was one gentleman there that didn't work for NASA, but he was like a consultant for the U.S. Defense Department, GPS, and NASA. And he was a physicist and a painter. Very interesting combination. He was a well-known astrophysicist and a photorealist painter. Most people in the mainstream know him as a well, not even the mainstream, but in the physics circles, know of him as a scientist, but they didn't know he had this knack of photorealistic painting. And it's something they kind of kept under wraps. With me, however, I was a very good photorealist painter. I would say I was better than him, and I was better at recreating textures that don't exist. And there was a party at somebody's cottage in the Hamptons, and the power went out, and it was about 1 o'clock in the evening, and there was one gentleman who was friends with this guy. He was this consultant for the U.S. Defense Department. Now, this guy was basically a friend of one of my superiors and a colleague. And basically, they started to, I think the conversation started turning around like something was about GPS coordinates weren't working or something concerning Antarctica. And so then he made a crack. This gentleman was working for them both as a consultant. So it was like, I was like, well, so you should go out there and, just and check this thing out, see if it's still functional. And then somebody made a quip to the effect that, well, if he goes out that far, he ain't coming back. And I asked, like, well, what do you mean, like, well, why wouldn't he come back if it's like, if he can go back on his, because GPS doesn't reach that far. And then I was like, well, why doesn't GPS reach that far? I mean, is it too cold? And it's like, it's because it's flat. And they started laughing, and they all started laughing. And my superior had quite a weird smirk on his face. He was watching me to see how I would take all this. And there was no lights on, and they had candles that they just lit. And then basically he took out some chalk, and it was like a cement sort of plank floor of some sort. And he started drawing out the Earth, all the continents exactly, but how they function, everything, physics, science, how everything we understand in movement of energy and objects in this new or hidden science, hidden from the public, how everything is caused by temperature, as opposed to like this very evasive notion of energy with Einstein and Hawking, that there's 3 ingredients to make a universe: energy, mass, and space. It was temperature. Temperature was why there's mass and energy.
And you believed him right away?
It made a lot of sense, but he basically started to avert everything, and they were kind of laughing, but they were they were listening to him. He seemed to be like kind of like this guy who was just this weird. I thought he was some sort of nut that these guys. Like, he was basically just like picking apart everything that they know or that they say every day in the office. He was basically explaining the flat Earth and how it works, and he literally drew the UN flag. And I thought this is a joke on me. This is some sort of initiation to see if I'm stupid or to see if I'm going to buy into this. I thought they were fucking playing with me to see if they could convince me it was flat. And what was creepy about the whole thing is that they were more laughing at me for not getting it. It never went back to it being a ball with these gentlemen that night. It might have been that at the office the next day, in front of everybody else, you know, the underlings, but, and then for weeks, I couldn't think, everywhere I went, every time I saw the picture of the Earth, it was like just a logo, it was a painting, it was like, it was a graphic. And then I started to scrutinize the actual images of the Earth they claim are photos. And it just started looking silly, like a cartoon. Like, why is the water so blue if it's reflecting the blue atmosphere, but I could still see the brownness of Africa? Like, wouldn't I be seeing Africa through the blue atmosphere? Like, why is the green and the brown of continents so clear with the blue of the water when the water of the oceans is just reflecting the blue atmosphere? And how come the whole thing, being 3 parts water, isn't reflecting the blackness of space? Like, it really, I started seeing all these flaws. And the more and more I tried to prove this guy wrong, or just to find out if they were joking or pulling my leg, the more I realized they weren't joking.
What do you think you were the one that they spoke about? That they told that to? I
think there was some projects coming up down the pipeline. Mars, a few things that they wanted to know. I think the whole thing was to see how I would play ball. Like, let him in on it. He'll ask more questions, and we'll study his reaction. And if he has the proper reaction to maybe be part of the deception, we'll let him in on the next project, the next contracts that we want him to falsify, the next images we need him to counterfeit.
How many people were told the same information in the
These
company?
guys were all privy to it, but these guys were all high-placed people at NASA and the U.S. Defense Department.
Any other colleagues of your level that were aware also?
No. Everybody at my level was doing graphics, doing prototypes, and just, they would never believe. And what am I going to do? I'm going to tell them? Well, then they're going to tell them. So I was really alone in this situation. And I did more and more research, and then every time I came up to prove an equation, it was supported by an event that was created through mass media caused by NASA. Be it the moon landing, be it this, and then it was the moon rocks, and then Van Brouwer going to Antarctica to pick up rocks like 2 years before the first moon mission. Then the rocks just looked like, and then it came out a couple years ago that John Glenn, when he went on this world tour to sort of like do a PR campaign, hey, we went to the moon, and he gave rocks to the Queen of England, and she gave those rocks to the museum in Amsterdam, and up until a couple of years ago, they found out that was just petrified wood. It wasn't a rock from the moon at all. So, I mean, like, everything's starting to come out now, but it's said once in the newspaper, almost like it's a revelation of the method, a he on everybody. But.
And how did you deal with having the information in your head and continuing to work on the projects you were hired for?
Well, after a while, extensions changed, numbers were dead, and I was not acknowledged. I didn't get through. I mean, even people I worked with, the agency said that they never even worked for them. So the whole thing looks like it's just like, so I look crazy. You know what I mean? Like, I'm telling you, like, the guys I work with, when I call back, you know, didn't, like, the agency saying they never worked for them, which I pretty much imagine is what they're saying right now, or what they were going to say about me was the same thing. I mean, go ahead, call them up, ask if Boylan, the comedian, ever drew paintings for NASA.